Hey, welcome back. Oh, I got it here, thank you. Welcome back. We're going to go into psychology to mysticism now. And you recall the challenge is how to unload the unconscious. And mystical prayer. When you pray, go to your inner room, close the door, and pray. Let me do this visually. When you pray, go to your inner room, close the door, and pray to your Heavenly Father in secret, and He will hear you in secret and will repay you. And who sees you in secret will repay you. And that really is the heart of what the contemplative practice is and what we're going to get into. Mystical experience. The most beautiful emotion we can experience is a mystical. What spiritual and writer, what priest wrote that? What do you think? Tell me. What saint? Saint Einstein. Isn't that amazing? What was he doing talking about this kind of stuff? Prayer definitions. Let's start at the beginning, okay? Meditation. This is the etymological term. It's not the term you'll hear in the secular world. Latin, meditatio, means to think. It focuses on thoughts, including adoration, contrition, thanksgiving, and supplication. You remember acts for prayer. And the most common is supplication. Please, help basically. Mind alone or verbalized. Contemplation is Latin contemplatus, means to gaze attentively, resting in God. It is silent without thoughts, thus opening ourselves up to the gift of divine union. Does that mean we get divine union? No, it just opens ourselves up to that gift. Ultimately, it's still a gift from God, which we may or may not get. Contemplation is a synonym for mystical. Now, where did this all come from? Well, it started in the Desert Fathers and Mothers in Egypt. And actually, St. Anthony was the first monk. And he was at a cave. He lived in a cave. And this is the cave of St. Anthony. And the tradition has it that he went in there for a decade. They would feed him, and they thought he was going to come out, he was going to be nuts. But he came into service and served others. And these are the Coptic monks that take care of that location. So what I'm about to give you is very historic. Relinquishing thoughts. The mind rejects the whole wealth and attendance of thoughts. The soul then pours out to God wordless prayer. Remember the prayer that we practiced at the beginning? And we were talking about letting go of thoughts? Well, this is written down by the guy by the name of St. John Cassian. He wrote the conferences. He was the first news reporter in the Catholic Church that I'm aware of. And he basically interviewed the Desert Fathers and Mothers and wrote down his report in the conferences. And it's this thing. And it basically describes what they were doing. And I did not read the whole thing. It's huge. But it's translated into English only within the last 20 years, 30 years. It's amazing. And basically, our conferences 9 and 10 talk about prayer. And I studied those over pretty carefully. And what's interesting is St. Benedict did the rule of Benedict for all the convents and monasteries from then on out. And he used this book as a source. So we know that they were almost contemporaries. Cassian was born earlier than St. Benedict. Now, there were periods of Christian periods of this prayer practice, and I'm going to go through some of the major events. 45 to 95, the New Testament, that's where that quote comes from on Matthew 6:6. And when you pray, Jesus was asked, how do you pray? This was Jesus' answer. When you pray, go to your inner room, close the door. The next was the conferences. They were written in 300s, and that was about the time of the Desert Fathers and Mothers. So it documents this practice. And so if anybody tells you this is New Age or something, they haven't done the research on the history. Pseudo-Dionysius was one of the major people, and now every century had something. But the Pseudo-Dionysius was very well known for this practice. And he goes by the name of Pseudo, which means nobody knew his name. And then Bernard of Clairvaux, very famous in the 1100s. Then a book called The Cloud of Unknowing in the 1300s. And what's fascinating about The Cloud of Unknowing, it was written by an anonymous Benedictine monk, a powerful book. God, he got the message, and it's powerful if you ever get a chance to read it. Then it was relegated to the cloisters. I'm putting this in simplified terms, but basically it was mystical, which doesn't mean magic, but it comes from the word mystery, and the hierarchy of the church felt it was mystery to them. They were okay with the convents and monasteries holding it there, but basically they said, guys, keep it in there, the lay people won't get this, because we don't get it. I'm oversimplifying, okay? So it was relegated to the cloisters. And then it was felt for hundreds of years to be very abnormal grace. And then Vatican II comes out and says, basically to the various orders, re-examine your history and your source and go back to that. And so the Trappists and the Benedictines, the real cloister groups, the real monastics, did just that. And one of them, the Trappists, formed Contemplative Outreach in 1984, and that was founded by 3 Trappist monks, but actually mainly Keating, Thomas Keating, who was my mentor. Now, having gone through those periods, who are the Christian mystics? Well, there are mystics today, and we get confused as to whether they're ancient and always history, or are they here? We're going to talk about first millennium, second, and modern. Origen, Clement of Alexandria, St. Gregory of Nyssa, St. Basil the Great. Cardinal Donardo did his thesis on, I think it was Gregory of Nyssa. And then there's St. Cassian, St. Augustine, St. Benedict. Then the second millennium, Hildegard of Bingen, St. Francis, St. Dominic, St. Catherine of Siena was a mystic. Meister Eckhart, wonderful. I love Meister Eckhart. You got to read that stuff. Julian of Norwich, Cloud of Unknowing. St. Ignatius of Loyola, in the Ignatian spirituality, they get to it at the very end. The Trappists jump right into the monastic mystical step. And of course the giants are Teresa of Avila and John of the Cross. Modern, I was blessed to have met Menninger, Pennington, and Keating. And in Pennington, it was by phone. I was in conversation with him. Lawrence Freeman is solid. He's Benedictine, and he's giving a talk at our conference in Rome. And I was blessed to be at Gethsemane when Merton was there, but never met him. Devout Christian. The devout Christian of the faith of the future will either be a mystic, one who has experienced something, or she will cease to be anything at all. Who wrote that? Karl Rahner, theologian. He was the theologian who's taught St. Benedict, Pope Benedict. Unbelievable to make that statement. People are not recognizing the importance of this. Prayer problem. My discursive prayer life sucked. This is not a spiritual writer, this is me. And it's true. That's exactly how I felt. I was constantly playing God by telling him what I needed, when I needed it, and even how I needed it. He already knew what I needed, since he knew me better than I knew myself. What was I doing? I reached that point where I thought, this is nuts. What am I doing? Now, I'm not suggesting that discursive prayer and asking God for help and all, that's very important. I'm not discounting that. But I reached a point in my journey where I thought, hold it. What the heck am I doing, God? You already know. So that was my story. So the question is, and question perhaps the images of God or one of them, but God images are picture or statue, one of Trinity, cloud or star. We can pick a lot of images that would be in our mind what we might picture God to be. Imageless, unknown, and ultimately as mystics, you end up reaching the imageless unknown, because ultimately God is imageless. Mystics talk about God being no thing, and then they take the leap and they contract the word into nothing. That's not meant to be an insult. It's meant to be no thing. We can't visualize. When we're young, they have a visualization of God. When I started out, I was visualizing God the Father. But I had a father that judged me, and I could get in trouble if I did something wrong, so it started to be kind of an ogre vision, a vision of a God that was kind of an ogre. And then I started to switch as a teenager more to Jesus because he became one of us. I could relate to him more. And later in life, I visualized and moved to praying to the Spirit that dwells within all of us. And then ultimately, in this practice, there is no image ultimately. Now, what are the prayer definitions? We've been talking about this, and this is the interesting thing. How do the saints and everybody talk about definitions of prayer? That's one of the things that interested me. I was looking at it. Speaking to God, most common. If I give a presentation, I said, well, what is prayer? Almost always they'll say speaking to God. Well, what about the listening part? Entreat or ask God, precari, this is Latin. Surge of the heart, St. Teresa of Lisieux. She was a mystic. And in fact, it was Teresa of Avila that inspired her, and then she inspired Teresa of Calcutta. The three Teresas, all mystics. Nothing but love, St. Augustine of Hippo. Longing of the soul, Mahatma Gandhi. Relationship with God, Keating. So in our discussion, to my mind, it's relationship with God that settles in the nicest, and it's more consistent with all the signs that went just before us. It's relationship, and it makes more sense because it's not that these other notes are wrong, but moving forward in our discussion, we'll just talk about relationship with God. Relationship analogies. Prayer is relationship with God. That's going to be the basis of this. Now, this particular slide is probably one of the most important you'll see. Kind of summarize, there's a lot to it. I'm going to compare the human relationship with the divine relationship. And I'm going to ask for a volunteer. Lyndon, come on up. By the way, I was told not to record anybody here, and that's fair. But he knows me, so we're okay. Okay.
Yeah, for better or for worse, I know that.
We'll talk about the first step being acquaintanceship, okay?
All right.
Lyndon, my name is Bob Hesse. What is your full name?
Lyndon Price. Yeah.
Oh, nice to meet you.
Good to meet you, Bob.
What are your interests?
Food.
Food? Yeah, we eat. Yeah, you enjoy eating.
Athletics. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thanks, Lyndon. We'll get together sometime.
You
okay?
bet. Look forward to it.
It's right here. So this is basically the analogous to the divine relationship of reading Lectio. In other words, you're reading scripture to say, what was this guy Jesus like? Well, he liked to eat. He likes to eat. So this is how I know what he likes, okay? So you're getting acquainted with each other. Very formal, not super personal, but very formal. And when it comes to liturgy, this is like the readings of scripture at Mass. You're reading scripture and you're trying to understand, who is this guy, Jesus? Then we go to the next level. Can you hear me back and forth? It's hard. Now, Lyndon, that dinner we had together, that food was great. I didn't know you knew wine and food together like that so much.
Yeah,
That's great. We'll have to do it more often.
you bet, we'll
Okay.
do that.
Okay, this is more of a friendliness. Now it's no more fancy introductions. We're thinking about each other, meditatio. And in liturgy, this is the homily. Basically, we're relating these readings to ourselves more now. Okay? And it's meditatio. And remember the definitions of meditatio. It's thinking. Okay? Which is discursive prayer or whatever. Now we're going to assume that Lyndon's got a serious illness, okay? And we're going to go into friendship. Lyndon, I'm so sorry that you are sick. And you know I would do anything I could for you, you know, and I know you would do the same if I were sick. Please know that I'm praying for you, okay? This is the stage where you're speaking oratio to each other. And you're saying, I really care about you. This is serious relationship, okay? And it's the petitions prayers at Mass, right after the homily. Now we're speaking to God, and we're saying what we need, and we're asking for his help and his prayers, just as we offer to each other. And most people don't think past that point of speaking prayer, okay? But there is another level, and that's union. Because I know he was sick, remember? There are no words. This is contemplation, or in Latin, contemplatio. Your wife, you kiss her. When you're kissing, you wouldn't be thinking about speaking, nor could you while you're kissing her. It's basically the divine hug. It's really communion in the Mass. When I receive communion, we're doing it in community. Communion with union. This is the profound stage of contemplation. And that's the stage that we look to get to. Thank you. Thanks, Lyndon. So let's take a look at this table of approach in sequence. Steps 1 through 4 are Lectio Divina. Now that subject came up earlier. And this is, Lectio Divina can be done either in the monastic or the scholastic approach. And some form is shared by all the faiths, but it's actually all these steps. The monks in the monasteries and the nuns in the convents use this. And they settle in on the words of Scripture and then rest in a word at the last step, similar to what we did at the beginning of this whole retreat. 1 through 3 are discursive prayer. That's cataphatic in the Greek. Acts, A-C-T-S, adoration, contrition, thanksgiving, supplication. You might hear this used as guided meditation. Sometimes it'll be referred to that way. 4th is contemplative apophatic in the Greek. The example is centering prayer. Now, what I taught at the beginning of the retreat, that was centering prayer. Now, having said that, let's go to the definitions again. Centering prayer is a method to facilitate contemplative prayer. It's a method to help you facilitate that last step. Contemplative prayer is an opening of the whole being to God's actions. It's a synonym for mystical. And so what God does is God's business. All we're doing is making ourselves available through centering prayer. We're lessening the ruminations in the conscious brain and allowing the unconscious brain to unload where all that stuff is, remember? So what are we going to do with that stuff? Prayer fundamentals. Don't seek anything except intention to be in God's presence and consent to God's presence in action. And basically, whatever happens next is a gift. What do? You take sacred symbols that you use as your prayer focus in centering prayer. And remember at the beginning I suggested you pick a word. Well, you can pick a word or a symbol. Words or examples, or preferably one or two syllables. You don't want the word itself to cause thoughts. So the word God may not be a good word. One, nil. It only has to have meaning to you. Images, preferably images that are not going to cause thoughts, so preferably not sharp edges, cloud, star, light, flame. It's been my experience that 60% of the people, 70% of the people like a word. They tend to be more left brain, okay? I am more right brain, so I went to an image, cloud, etc. And when you have that word or image that you pick, you don't change it during the 20-minute period. You keep it, because if you start thinking you picked the wrong word, that is itself a thought. You can always switch the next time. So what are some of the guidelines of what you do and how you do it? When, where, what, how? You relaxed and alert. When? Before meals. You don't want to have a heavy meal that all the blood's rushing to your stomach. Minimum 20 minutes. Morning and afternoon. Twice a day is recommended. Where? Quiet environment. Dim lighting. Unlikely interruptions. Turn the television off, your phone off. Alone or in a group. We do it once a week on Zoom. And in person you do it. It gives you a sense that other people are doing it. It gives you encouragement when you have people that have been doing this before. And then what? Sturdy chair, gentle gong. We didn't use a gong here, but I use a gentle gong. There's apps for that. Loose clothing. I'll sometimes loosen my belt before I start. And a verse or a chant like I did. Be still and know I am God, etc. How? Straight back, head free, feet planted on the ground firmly, and closed eyes. Okay, this is the important slide that you saw at the beginning, and I'll go through it again. You have your sacred symbol, you choose the word or image as an intention to be with God. Then you sit comfortable position and sit there for 20 minutes. And as thoughts come and you became aware you're engaging them, you ever so gently return to your sacred word or image as a symbol of your desire to be with God. And there's eventually a gentle readjustment for a couple of minutes. You don't get up and do a jig. So, what are you doing? If you'll notice, we're focusing on lessening the ruminations of the conscious brain. When we become engaged with our thoughts, we return ever so gently to the sacred word, and then the sacred word comes, and then you let it go. You don't keep repeating it if you don't need it. 4 R principles. Resist no thoughts, retain no thoughts, react to no thoughts, return ever so gently to the sacred word. And then it comes and goes. What are the benefits of doing this? Benefits are not necessarily during the prayer. The fruits of the Spirit quite often come outside that. They're not cause and effect. You do this, you get that. That's human thinking. We're just opening ourselves up to God. We're surrendering to God's will. It's not all just pleasurable. The unloading of the thoughts can be very profound. Most are pleasurable, but some of them can be profound. And we'll get into some anecdotal experiences I've seen in teaching it, including to a PTSD patient, as you can imagine. Prayer's purpose, the benefits are not the purpose of the prayer. You're not doing this to get anything out of it. That's the key. You don't want to keep thinking you're doing this to get anything. It's not like, God, please help me here, please help me there. Remember the problem I had with that prayer? I decided, I like this. I'm surrendering to God. Present instantly? They're not present instantly. They're not totally predictable. They're not divinely guaranteed. And they're not a replacement of discursive prayer. I'm not suggesting this is something that you replace your discursive prayer with. What are the benefits? Personal growth, listening ability, less judgmental. I told you about the highway experience. My right hand doesn't go up anymore, okay, thank God. But unconsciously get used to the fact that you're not going to react to these stimuli. And as a result, there's less judging. All those isms, they come unconsciously let go. Human relationships, action, not reaction. Like I said with the car driving, it's not a reaction. Others recognize change. When I started this practice, my wife said, "You're changed, what's going on? What are you doing?" I didn't see it, she did. You can do this anywhere. Selfless service, self-lessened, other-oriented. This is where the indwelling spirit, there's an experiential engagement that you can't put into words, and then you practically start unconsciously seeing that God dwelling with others. You become more interested in service. Where do you practice it? We talked about where. When I was consulting with the monks in the monastery in Snowmass, where Keating was, they said, you can do it anywhere. In an airport. I said, "Are you crazy?" I was pretty blunt with these monks, okay? And sure enough, I get in the airport, everything's, all over the place, all that noise, and all that noise became background elevator music. I was not engaged. Then I heard my name called, and I recognized it, and I got up and went. I'm in my car, I come to a stop sign, got my foot on the brake. I go into centering prayer with my eyes closed. People say to me, "Well, how do you do that? What happens when the light changes?" Well, the guy behind reminds me that I gotta get going. Not a problem. Automatic alarm. Extending benefits. Pray twice daily. This is pretty much the practice. Read sacred scripture, because you get Lectio Divina, you get words from there sometimes, but I don't propose you keep changing the words. Read writings of the mystics. That can be powerful. And there are wonderful mystics alive today. Jim Finley will be talking at the conference. He's part of Richard Rohr's group, and Richard Rohr himself. Father Lawrence Freeman, a Benedictine, written many, many things. Participate in prayer groups. And this is important once a week or more, but usually just once a week, because it reminds you that you're not alone doing this, which is where you're normally at. And then there are other people that are more experienced, and they can help you. If you're saying, "Well, I've got problems with this and that," they can say, "Well, I've been doing this for 20 years. Don't worry about it." Attend contemplative retreats. Now, we've had some bouts of silence here, but a contemplative retreat is 10 days of silence, or 3 days. Ruha Center has contemplative retreats on weekends. Powerful. I would recommend that. And then after my experience, then I went to Snowmass and did 10 days silent retreat. Physical benefits: lower blood pressure, less sleep needed, less melancholy, less suffering, less nervous, less anger. These are consistent with Benson in Harvard's list that I gave you earlier, but that was made in Buddhism. This is theism. And in a sense, people say, well, why do the benefits come to people that are in Buddhism? Well, God dwells within everyone on earth. It doesn't matter that they don't realize and recognize the fact that God is the modus operandi here. That's okay. However, the research that I showed you in Koenig did shows that if you have a faith belief, you're much better off statistically. So why not turn this over to a higher power rather than just letting go of your thoughts with a mantra? That's the argument, basically, you should consider. It's not that the Buddhists don't have wonderful practice. Spiritual benefits, well, these are the gifts of the Spirit. And in Scripture, if you look at it, there are 3 or 4 lists that they list them 3 or 4 times. And each time the lists are a little different. But basically, these are in the list. And God knows which one we need the most. He knows where we need help. That way, I don't have to tell God what I need. He does it. It's wonderful. The most common reported is peace. And this lessens the ruminations in the conscious brain. This is just what we've been talking about. Okay? It leaves room for the unconscious to unload. The unconscious gift. Contemplation is a pure gift, but it must be emphasized that it is a gift that has already been given. Its powers are present but hidden in the unconscious. Eating. These monks they're pros at this. They know how to teach it, and they practice. But does it mean that it's easy for them? Before a presentation one time I sat with Keating, and he wanted to do contemporary prayer right before we went out to be at his talk. And we had only 4 or 5 minutes. And we sat together a very short time. And once you practice this 1 or 2 minutes, at the stop sign will work. Pick a long stop sign. No, it's better to... Spiritual beings. We are not human beings having a spiritual experience. We are spiritual beings having a human experience. No kidding. Teilhard de Chardin. Father Teilhard de Chardin. Universal consciousness. The brain itself doesn't produce consciousness. That it is instead a kind of reducing valve or filter, sifting the larger non-physical consciousness that we possess in the non-physical world down into a more limited capacity for the duration of our mortal lives. Who said that? Well, that was Dr. Eben Alexander, who had a near-death experience and experienced this. There is a sense in science that universal consciousness is their word for God. And that's okay if they want to call it that. They don't want to, mix religion and science. But what's fascinating is the terminology may be different, but the descriptions coming together. It's amazing. Contemplative network. Because I started to see things when I was teaching people, and I went to Keating and I said, look, I'm seeing things teaching this to people who are suffering from illnesses. And I said, contemplative outreach is just teaching it. I want to do research on this, and I want to do service to people, besides just teaching the practice. And the place to do it is in Houston, the largest medical center in the world. So we established Contemplative Network. I was co-founder, and we have a board, and an interfaith board. And in the silence, interfaith centering prayer, in that silence, there's no dogma. So we can practice with any theistic belief system. And on our board is John Graham, who's the 3 doctorates, and he's the former president of the Institute for Spirituality and Health, which is the oldest such organization in the country. He was the first one to train chaplains. Rabbi Harvey Rosenstock, a rabbi, a medical doctor, psychiatrist, and a Kabbalist, which is the Jewish form of mysticism, Kabbalah. And Imam Jamal ar-Rahman, a Sufi. Now in Islam, Sufism is the contemplative tradition. And in all these different religions, it's interesting, the contemplative traditions, which is a more generic term, they tend to be minimalized. It happens in Christianity. In Judaism, they tell them, oh, this is just for the advanced. In Christianity, it was just for the people in the monasteries and convents. Don't tell those lay people. Well, this is coming out different. So here are the anecdotal stories. My wife is bipolar. Bipolar is a huge rumination of thoughts. And then doing silly things, then regretting it and going deep down into depression. And then after being there a while, getting some exciting experiences, feeling better, and getting and say, boy, I haven't had this good feeling for a long time, and then they're manic and then they drop again. I was at my wit's end. I got to tell you, I didn't know what to make of it. After I learned this practice, I introduced my wife to it in our backyard. And I had a feeling that with those ruminations, if she could deal with that in a century prayer, that would help her. So, taught it to her. After 20 minutes of silence, I came out, I went away. She stayed there another 15, 20 minutes herself. Total peace. Total peace. PTSD veteran. I taught 10 people. I didn't know them. And about a month or two later, I run into one of the people, a man. I said, how's it going? And he said, I had something serious happen. I said, well, what happened? He said, I became fully, during the prayer. Now, this is during the prayer. Normally, the fruits of the Spirit are separate, but this was during the prayer. During the prayer, the unconscious was unloading. I became fully aware of what really happened to me in Vietnam. What did you do? He said, I ever so gently let it go and returned to God. Wow. I told that to another board member of the Institute. I was vice chairman of the board of the Institute. Another board member, Dr. Lomax, who was one of the top psychiatrists in Houston, retired now. He said, we have trouble treating patients. We got whole floors at the VA hospital. I said, you got a solution here. He couldn't believe it. Parkinson's patient. I'm in Cuba. And I gave a research project that we did on near-death experiences and other things. I'll talk about it. And that's next. And they asked me to come to their house afterwards and teach. And this was the daughter of the head of the whole conference, who had invited me to give a talk on faith and science. And it was the first time in Cuba, in the medical system there, that religion was talked about in Cuba. It was stunning. Up until then, the communists wouldn't allow it. And so they asked me to come over. The daughter of the man, who's also an MD psychiatrist, said, would you come to our house in our apartment and teach centering prayer? So I get there. And I will tell you that when I got there, she said, there are about 6 people coming, and one of them's a Parkinson's patient. I said, okay. So we get there, everybody seemed normal. Then suddenly, just before we're about to begin, and they're translating my instructions into Spanish, because I don't speak Spanish, the Parkinson's patient goes into a full-blown freeze, which is a Parkinson's term for what, as a layman, you would call a seizure. And as I am wont to do, I get into a mental argument with God. What do you expect me to do here? This is crazy. What am I supposed to do? Get on with it. So I did. And the instructions I gave them were exactly the same as I gave you, with one exception. I said, now, Jose, you're trying to let go, I'm trying to stop this. That's a thought. You have to let that go. And the rest of us, we're trying to help him stop this. That's a thought we have to let go. We went deep. I normally don't go deep when I'm teaching it. And everybody went deep, hands down, on their knees, etc. And I kept an eye on Jose. Within a minute or two, he's down. End. Total silence. I had never taught a Parkinson patient in full-blown freeze. I was like... So I quietly brought everybody out, because I didn't want him to come out if he wanted to stay there. He stayed there another 15 minutes past 20. At the end of that, and by the way, when that was happening, I whispered to the two doctors, the husband and wife, both MDs, psychiatrists, and neuroscientists. I said, this is your next research project. At the end of that whole period, he gets up, he comes this close to my nose, and in passionate Spanish starts to unload and tell me this. I didn't understand it. They translated. When Castro took over, he took everybody into the countryside, all the children, to purge them of their belief in God. I've been looking for God my whole life, and I have finally found him. All we could do was put our heads on each other's shoulders and weep. We both cried. Near-death experiences relived as mysticism. I was a consultant in Mustang engineering, and at lunchtime I taught centering prayer. There were 10 of us, and 10 of the people, and they were their first experience. And at the end of the 20 minutes, they came out, and 3 of them started to passionately describe that they had just relived the near-death experience they had earlier in their life. I made a note of that. When I got to Cuba, and I talked to the head of the conference, and a whole another story, how he got me to bring faith and science to that for a whole day of his international English conference. I said, you're world-renowned for bringing people out of coma. Do you have many patients who have talked about near-death experiences? He said, oh yeah, all the time. I said, you mean to tell me you got brain scans of these people? He said, well, I don't know if it was when they were having that experience. Then I remembered that in Cuba, the former chairman of Contemplative Outreach was a Catholic priest, Father, I can't remember his name now. Anyway, priest. And I got in touch with him and I said, can you tell me of when you were teaching this, did you have many people have a mystical experience during the prayer, which can happen 5 to 10% of the time? He said, oh yeah. Now we got our 2 sets of patients, 5 and 5. Did that research. Synchronicity. The simultaneous occurrence of events which appear significantly related but have no discernible causal connection. We were talking. Carl Jung. One of the signs of the God speaking to us. Neuroplastic learning. Neuroplasticity means that emotions such as happiness and compassion can be cultivated in much the same way a person can learn through repetition to play golf and basketball or master a musical instrument, and that such practice changes the activity and physical aspects of specific brain areas. Andrew Wheel, MD. Now, one of the co-authors of some of our research was a man by the name of Dr. Newberg. I'm having trouble reading this, but I could do it. And he did brain scans of Franciscan nuns doing centering prayer, before and after. And then he published this some time ago. And these were MRI studies. And there was a correlation. You could see a change in the brain when they were practicing centering prayer. Now, when we did the research, one of the research projects we did was bipolar centering prayer. And I won't show you a bunch of scans, it'll just be one. But this particular one was an average of 5 patients showing significant centering prayer effect. that in solving the QEG abnormality in bipolar patients during the depressive phase. In other words, there's a marker for people who suffer from bipolar, and after sending prayer, it disappears. And instead of showing you a bunch of brain scans, I'll show you a patient that they did. They did 4 patients, and they taught them. I didn't. And they didn't know how to teach them very well. The teacher would touch them. You're not supposed to do that. But this is the guy's wife. And rather than show you a bunch of brain scans, I'll just play a part of what they saw in all 4.
El paciente hace su rutina diaria en 2 ocasiones al día, a veces hasta 3, su centro de meditación acompañado por sus familiares. En este caso, no lo hicimos el de la mañana para llevarlo a su máximo grado de temblor. Esto le ocasiona un estado de ansiedad generalizada, depresión, angustia, y pues vamos a comenzar en breve a realizar su centro de meditación junto a sus familiares y la doctora neuróloga que lo acompaña. Veremos el cambio de antes y después.
Well, I think you got the idea, okay? And that was the research that was done as a result of me being at her house and being inspired to do this. Now, why are we doing this research? Well, it's because the hospitals will not listen to religion back in the hospitals. About 200 years ago, we got separated. So they will only understand science. So that's what we're doing it for. We know about this, but to convince them to let religion back in, the VA hospital, for example, only allows Buddhism in because it's non-theistic. So this is the battle we're up against. Now, transcendent events. NDE, near-death experiences, I call these spiritual contemplative experiences that are happening outside of near-death. But in a sense, near-death experience is a mystical experience. Now, Dr. Moody described near-death attributes in 1975, and Dr. William James described the mystical attributes in his variety of religious experience in 1902. So this is pretty old. The singularity, Einstein's theories led to singularity attributes in the beginning of the Big Bang. I contend that these are the transcendent events between this world and the next. And the near-death experiences and research we did is going to be able to lessen people's fear of death if they have that. And so, the near-death experiences are paranormal, out-of-body, spiritual contemplative, spaceless ecstasy, what St. Teresa of Avila describes. Well, it's dimensionless. There's non-material in the singularity. We're going to see the very similarities between all of these because they're all at that transition between this life and the next. Cognitive timeless short prayer, timeless no light. When you practice this, you think it only was 3 or 4 or 5 minutes, and actually it's 20. So you lose sense of timing. Effective peace, wholeness, perfection, senses that people will report. Ordered zero entropy. Transcendent divine religious oneness with the universe. People will talk about that. The singularity, it's the unified 4 forces. It's Einstein's equation. So these are the transcendent events. Love alone is capable of uniting living beings in such a way as to complete and fulfill them, for it alone takes them and joins them by what is deepest in themselves. You can tell I like Father Teilhard de Chardin. consciousness within? Who looks outside dreams? Who looks inside awakes? There is no coming to consciousness without pain. Isn't it sad that suffering is where you get to this point? In my journey, it was my wife suffering, and then me suffering with her. God sometimes has to get our attention. But if she didn't suffer, I wouldn't be where I am today. Her suffering helped me grow spiritually. Carl Jung, psychiatrist. Oneness, one consciousness. There is the possibility that there is only one self. There is only God. There is only one self or one consciousness in fact. And in the light of scientific discoveries, if there is one consciousness, it is the infinite, unlimited consciousness of God, which is shared with every creature and according to its capacity. Thomas Keating. So, I wrote a lot of this stuff in the book, and there is a teacher's guide now that the publisher asked me to do so people can teach it. And that book became the agenda for the Rome conference. And that's a whole little story. We don't have time to get into it, but I will tell you that the Rome conference is scheduled for June 17th to June 20th, 2025, the Jubilee year. And it's the theme of the conference is A Journey into God's Mystical Love. And the four parts of the conference are matched to the four titles of the chapters of my book: Physics of Creation, Chemistry to Life, Biology to Consciousness, and Psychology to Mysticism. The goal is to show that those leaving their faith and clergy and scientists and medical professionals, that faith and science are consistent with each other. And I was blessed that when I was in Rome and talked to the guy whose idea this conference was, he made arrangements for me to give the book to the Pope. I don't necessarily think he read it, whatever. But he was so wonderful. I gave it to him and he said, and he reads English and he just read the cover. And he's very interested in this. He's got a bachelor's degree in biochemistry, I think. And he looked at me and he said, "Thank you." Kind of like, it's hard to describe. It was like, "Thank you," very little. Again, a Vatican conference in that time frame. It's the first regularly scheduled using off-site music and art. The book chapters are that, supported by Pontifical universities. Sistine Chapel private sacred music. Pope Francis will be available for depending on his availability, he'll give a private audience. And this is the QR code for registering. Now, I'm telling you about this because I'm stunned. I went to all these conferences that were very siloed around. And these conferences were secular, religious, contemplative, medical, and they were all siloed. They weren't talking to each other. No conference that I had gone to covered a broad range of all the topics I just went through today. And I wanted to fix that, and I wanted to get this message out there to raise money. By the way, the stipend I'm getting for this is donated completely to Contemplative Network, a nonprofit. And we're going to have the second conference here in Houston 2027 to try to expand the research to more than 5 patients, 2025, so that it's more statistically significant. And what's fascinating is when I went to all these conferences, I identified the top people. So of the speakers here now, they're coming to the conference not because of Bob, but because it's Rome and the Pope. So I want to take credit for that. And so 3 of them have worked for, or are currently, have studied under, or are currently working for Nobel laureates. There are 2 per chapter. So of the 4 talks we had today, there are 2 speakers for each of them. And they're going to talk about their own research, etc. And if you look online, I think you'll be amazed at this website. And I think there's some brochures up front, but It's basically, if you go to our website, contemplative.net, then the first thing that pops up is the link to the conference website. So I would offer a prayer reflection, focus on the silence of divine union, how we may open ourselves up to its gift and serve others.